Welcome to the Observer Research Foundation. We have this format called National Security Dialogues, where we discuss various issues and invite people from all walks of life to participate. So today we are looking at assessing China-Pakistan defense cooperation. Now, China-Pakistan defense cooperation, when we look at it today, it's virtually something we've virtually grown up with. And what has happened over time is that this has been maturing, and it has had some. It's a fairly solid relationship. And when I say solid relationship, China is the only nuclear country which transferred nuclear materials and nuclear weapons design and tested a Pakistani fabricated weapon in 1990, which is an extraordinary development because most nuclear countries have refused to cross certain lines. So that shows the solidity of that relationship. And in subsequent decades, of course, we saw in terms of missile cooperation, conventional, of course, has always been there. More recently has been the China-Pakistan naval exercise, which, if you look at the format, this was the first, this was held in last month in the Northern Arabian Sea. It was also spoken of as joint maritime patrols, meaning it had various features: anti-submarine, advanced joint drills, naval maneuvers, etc. But it also spoke of itself as joint maritime patrols. So this is a new development as far as we are concerned. As far as China itself is concerned, in the front of defense technology, the Australia Strategic Policy Institute says that China leads in 19 out of 23 technologies, including hypersonics, electronic warfare, undersea drones, and highlighted the need for the West to pool research. Of course, the assessment of a more mature assessment will say that China's military technology still lags behind the West. They suffer from some technical flaws. They have supply chain issues and delays. The top state-owned public sector units, they're not very efficient in the way they do things. So yes, China is making incredible advances in defense technology, but there are issues which still constrain its efforts. Now, today, to discuss this China-Pakistan defense cooperation, I have with me three speakers. Two of them are my colleagues in the Observer Research Foundation. Abhijit Singh, a former naval officer who is now a senior fellow here. Karthik Bomkanti, another senior fellow who is specialized in the area of defense. And then I have from London, Aisha Siddiqa, who's a well-known scholar of the Pakistan military, meaning her book, Military Incorporated, gave us perhaps the best overview of the nature of the Pakistan military. Not so much armaments and strategy and all that, but as a social institution. So Aisha will speak to us from London. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with Abhijit. And from what I can see, we can maybe speak for about 10 minutes each. Then we'll throw open the discussion to the floor. Abhijit.
Thanks. Thank you, sir. Thanks. It's a privilege to be here today to be talking to this very keen audience. When I came in, I didn't think it would fill up so soon, but now this is like a house full. So it feels very nice speaking to and seeing that there's so much of interest in the subject. I think it would perhaps be fair for me to start by saying that the subject of China-Pakistan defense is something that makes Indian analysts feel a bit uneasy. But it's a subject that never goes out of fashion entirely. It's a subject that's topical. It's exciting. There's always something new happening, and it's custom made to tickle Indian anxieties. And so, Dr. Joshi mentioned the new exercise, which is the naval exercise, which now seems to have become a trigger for Indian apprehension about what's happening in the Indian Ocean. There are many ways to look at China-Pakistan cooperation. But broadly and analytically speaking, there are three main questions that can be asked when it comes to cooperation between these two nuclear-powered nations. And the first one is that this relationship, as a strategic relationship, are we seeing this relationship evolve into some kind of an alliance, an axis that might be inimical or detrimental to Indian interests? And relatedly, is this coalescing concert of China-Pakistan naval forces in the Indian Ocean, again, something that India should be concerned about? So that's the first question. And I'd like to say on for this question that the answer could actually be a qualified yes. Why qualified? I will get into a little later, but why yes? I'd like to talk to you a little bit about. See, the fact is that over a period of time, what has emerged is that the China-Pakistan relationship, even though it's very close, is highly asymmetrical. Meaning it's China that dominates the relationship, to the extent that China is the power that literally defines, shapes Pakistan's choices. So if you actually look at the defense trade between China and Pakistan, China is now the leading defense provider for Pakistani equipment, arms, platforms. I am a maritime analyst, and so I can say that the fact that the Chinese are going to be giving Pakistan 8 submarines, the Hangur class, which is the Type 39 Yuan class submarines, fairly sophisticated submarines, should be a cause of worry for India, because at the moment, Pakistan has 5 submarines. But starting 2024, when the delivery of the Hangur class will begin, apparently what the news tells us, what public sources tell us, that every 6 months, Pakistan will have 1 new submarine. And that means that by the end of this decade, possibly, Pakistan will have about 13 submarines. And that's almost like a 150, 200% rise over what it has right now. The Type 54 Alphas, which are the frigates, very sophisticated frigates, China has already delivered. The Pakistanis are also retrofitting the Type 21s, which are Chinese. On the Air Force side, we have the JF-17s, which are jointly produced by Pakistan and China. There is the J-10s, and on the Army side, there is the Al-Khalid tank, which is going to have the VT4 technology again coming from China. So if you actually broadly look at it without getting into the technical specifications, a lot of these platforms are going to ramp up Pakistan's offensive capabilities, which should be a cause for worry for India. And then all of these are high-end strike platforms, which should also concern New Delhi. But I will also say that it's not just the quantum of armory and weapons and platforms that are going to be given to Pakistan that worries India. It's also the nature of the exercises. The fact remains that there's greater interoperability now between the armies, the navy, especially the navies, and also the 2 air forces. They do the Shaheen exercises, which are really high-end. And also we see on the Sea Guardian, which is the naval exercise, there's been some movement forward in terms of greater complexity of the exercises, a greater scope, more demanding exercises, which means that the 2 navies are working fairly well together. And yet I say that it's a qualified yes. And this actually links with my second question. Is there a degree of overstatement or exaggeration about what China and Pakistan are doing together? And I would say that there perhaps is a degree of exaggeration by the media, by the strategic community, and by the defense forces themselves. So let's look at Sea Guardian 3. It was billed, as Dr. Joshi noted, as the first joint patrol. But really, if you study the kinds of exercises that the two navies did, it was not very different from Sea Guardian 2 or Sea Guardian 1 that were held in 2022 and 2020. So all of these exercises, you have anti-submarine warfare, you have visit boat search and seizure, you have cross-deck landings, you have tactical maneuvering, anti-air, AMD, which is anti-missile defense. All of these are regular exercises that navies, when they exercise together, they regularly perform these drills together. In fact, as a former naval officer, I can tell you that if two navies that have a strategic relationship are getting together and they are not doing these kinds of exercises, something is really amiss, because you're not working on your interoperability. And the fact about interoperability is it's a way of conserving resource. It's a way of maximizing effort. So these are the things that you always do when you come together. So I won't hold this as something that should overly worry India, because when two nations get together, two navies get together, even the India and the US, we get together for Malabar along with Japan and Australia. We do the similar kinds of exercises. India does similar kinds of exercises with France. And so that does not mean that, we're in any ways trying to threaten a third country. It's just the nature of the maritime domain these days. You want to be able to maximize your effort. You want to be able to reduce the resources that you spend. And therefore, you have to have great domain awareness. You have to have greater data sharing. It should not surprise anyone if the censored data from one navy are providing information for targeting to another navy. This is something that always happens. So I say there's a degree of... But then there's a second point that I wish to make, which is that there is a school of thought which says that Pakistan actually finds India's posturing in the Indian Ocean to be troublesome. And the way to understand why China and Pakistan are where they are, and I'm going to only talk about the maritime domain because that's my area of focus, is because of these peculiar anxieties that Pakistan feels. And having had conversations during my long tenure as an analyst, I've had some conversations with Pakistani analysts, and one of the things they point out that Pakistan feels that India, because of the way it's growing, its navy is growing, its footprint is growing in the Indian Ocean, is the more aggressive side. And so they've got to somehow posture. There's an element of posturing to let India know, first of all, that that Pakistan is well positioned, or it's ready to defend itself. This does not mean that it's projecting power or it's projecting force by or threatening India. It's just simply making a statement that there are red lines and the Indians. This is a very native Pakistani opinion on the Indian Navy's growth in the Indian Ocean region. It may not be true, because everything at the end of the day is perception. What you see through the lens of your understanding, your prejudice, whatever you might call it. But the second thing is this, that if you were to study the Pakistan Navy's new doctrine that was released, I think actually not new now, it's 2018, a lot of focus is actually given to maritime diplomacy. And maritime diplomacy, as far as Pakistan is concerned, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more, maybe in the Q&A, about this excellent analysis done by Admiral Norman Bashir about 10, 15 years ago, in which he says that diplomacy is the new form of coercion or deterrence. If you have good diplomacy, if you have a good bunch of friends in the Indian Ocean or wherever your theater of responsibility, you can have great relationships with them, you can preserve your interests. So a lot of this doctrine, the Pakistani doctrine now, is about maritime diplomacy, and the only way they can maximize that diplomacy is by doing more with China, the one country that's willing to help them in this region. So exercise Aman that they do, there were 50 countries that attended this time. They do these exercises with the Sea Guardian with China every year. They stay, the operative facts as far as I'm concerned is that they stay within the waters that are close to Pakistan. They don't venture out into waters that are close to India. That's one. Second, China has not so far established a base in Pakistan. Even though the Pakistanis have been very keen, Pakistan Navy has been very keen for China to come and establish a base there, but China has desisted from doing so. And these exercises in no way threaten India's interests directly. So as far as India is concerned, we have to be cognizant of the fact that these exercises are regular exercises that two navies engage in when they meet. Is there something that is worrisome about these exercises? To a degree, there is, because we are not on the best of terms with either China or Pakistan. But we should be cautious and we should be vigilant, but we should not overreact to what's happening there. The third point I wish to make is this, that if you actually look at Chinese and Pakistani behavior, you would realize that that at the time that the Galwan crisis happened, the Pakistanis actually did not stir up trouble on the Western Front with India. In fact, the Pakistanis did also make statements to say that we are not going to take advantage of this situation that India is in, and we don't wish to be aggressive. And even China, at the time when the Balakot crisis happened, did not in any way try and create trouble for India. So that tells you that geopolitically, both countries may be under some kind of pressure not to up the ante or not to act against India at this moment. The fact is that Pakistan is at this moment going through a precarious time, economically. There's also, a militant problem with Afghanistan at this moment. So they're not really in a position to stir up much trouble. And plus, they also want to improve their relationships with India. And there's been a number of statements at this time. But even China, because of what's happening in Taiwan, the Taiwan crisis, the pressure from the Americans, perhaps does not feel this is the right moment for it to stir up any trouble. But I would think that if you study the Chinese maritime strategy, the Chinese white paper, 2019, makes it clear that as far as China's far seas interests are concerned, as far as possible, China will desist from the use of force. Unless it is a crisis scenario, it's wartime, and what is happening is directly targeting China's core interests, China will desist from the use of force. So personally, when I analyze this, I'm willing to give China benefit of doubt on this one account. It does not mean that the Chinese are a friendly nation. We have a problem, but in the maritime domain, there's got to be a different way in which we evaluate. Last point, I just want to make this. Are things going to change? This is my third question. Are things going to change if China establishes a base in Pakistan? I would say yes. Everything would change if China establishes a naval base in Pakistan, because that will show that China has some diabolical intent in this region, and that China is now willing to act on its equities in this region, and that will change the whole game. All bets are off if that happens. But I'm going to stop here and I speak some more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Abhijit, you put things very succinctly, and I think in a very balanced manner. But the problem is that the Western Indian Ocean is the most important ocean. You're as a Navy man, you know that. As far as India is concerned, between Bombay High and our oil supply lines. Yeah. So it is. But you have put it, in perspective that it's the base.
Yeah, that's right.
The Kiwani. Kiwani was one of the. Jivani. Yeah, but so far nothing has come about. What we'll do now is I'll ask my colleague Karthik Bomkanti to speak, and then we'll give Aisha the floor. Is that okay, Aisha, or do you want to speak?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good with it.
Okay. So, Karthik, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joshi, and fantastic presentation by my colleague, Mr. Abhijit Singh, Commander Abhijit Singh. And I also want to say hello to Dr. Aisha Siddiqa. I met her many years ago in Singapore. And thank you everyone for coming. And sorry, I was just a little late before the event started, but I was just trying to get a few printouts, but unfortunately the printer wasn't working. But anyway, Commander Abhijit Singh, my colleague, has certainly made some very important points and well-made points. But I would like to sort of expand a little more and look at some other elements or qualify what he says, especially with regard to, what I wanted to look at was just to look at some of the technological side, but Commander Singh mentioned that it is primarily an asymmetrical relationship in that China is primarily the pattern of Pakistan? Yes, to a significant degree, but I would say it's also a reciprocal relationship, simply because Pakistan's geography. On the technological side, certainly the Pakistanis are heavily dependent on China. China has very advanced capabilities. It has a significant defense industry. It certainly dwarfs Pakistan's. And Pakistan has been a recipient of a wide variety of technologies. Dr. Joshi spoke about nuclear technology, weapons technology especially, and of course missile technology. Almost all Pakistani missiles today in Pakistan's inventory are derivatives of Chinese missiles. But put the technological and the economic aside, its geographic location makes it such a valuable partner for China. And two, India is the common foe for both of them. Three, Pakistan, because of its location, because of its hostility and history of antagonism with India, serves as a very good low-cost balancing option. And it also threatens so much of the Indian hinterland, given the capabilities that the Chinese have transferred to the Pakistanis. Commander Singh, of course, did mention the whole range of capabilities, and even Dr. Joshi did earlier. I won't run through all of them, but I will make a point that because of that kind of transfer and imbuing Pakistan with those sorts of capabilities, equipping Pakistani with those same sorts of capabilities, it has really created, a real standoff threat for India, and a significant one in that sense. So its location has helped the Pakistanis, and Pakistanis have leveraged it very well. Now, as far as the other activities, such as in the naval domain, Commander Singh has pointed out, of course, the complexities of the exercise. They are not meant to actually completely threaten India, but it could be activated at short notice if things did turn for the worse. These exercises are meant to, prepare yourself for certain contingencies. And so there's a lot of contingency planning that goes on between China and Pakistan. So that's something that you should bear in mind. And Gwadar itself, I do believe they've really made a bet. The Chinese, of course, they're flexible enough. They could even move to, Chabahar in Iran. They're actually threatening our position there in Chabahar itself. But certainly Gwadar is something that they've really bet on. It's a warm water port. It's a deep water port. It's close to the Gulf of Hormuz. You have a partner otherwise in Pakistan that is it's been a very reliable partner. And you have to remember, when it comes to that sort of reliability, China does not have too many allies or partners. Pakistan is just one of them. And, North Korea maybe. Or you might say Cambodia today, they're building a base in Cambodia. But it really does not have too many allies. In Latin America, they're cultivating a few. But I'm not too sure what the strategic consequence of that is going to be. But in Cuba especially, at least in the Caribbean, but other parts of Latin America like Argentina and so. But my point is, finally, I don't want to take too long, that this is not just a threshold alliance. It is, I would say, pretty much an alliance which is likely to deepen, particularly as India's relationships with other countries such as the Americans also evolve and become deeper, and our relations, and we also build up our own capabilities. This could become much deeper, and it should be something that we should watch out for. As far as is there a joint threat? That's the last point I wanted to respond and answer as well. Commander Singh did mention, that the Pakistani didn't do very much in Galwan when Galwan happened, or vice versa. Yes, that's true, but you have to remember that you can't rule it out in the future. Simply because, the Pakistanis, because of their woeful economic circumstances, have just taken a step back. But once they tide over their current economic woes, they'll be back to business again. That's what I would warn again. And they could also collude with the Chinese. But that collusion need not take even of the form of a joint attack. It just requires even mobilization of forces by one of the two parties. One side could start a war, the other side could just mobilize forces at its end. Not so much starting a war or attacking Indian positions, but could do that, and that could create a lot of problems for India. So this is something that we ought to bear in mind, so that's where I'll stop. I don't want to take too long, so that we can give Dr. Siddiqa sufficient time.
Thank you, Karthik. And now we have our last speaker, Dr. Aisha Siddiqa, who is speaking to us from UK, where she is a fellow at the SOAS. And I don't know, a little bit of background. She is born in Lahore. She worked at the Pakistan Civil Service and thereafter became a researcher and written this outstanding book called Military Incorporated on Pakistan, and is a very well-known scholar and commentator on Pakistan. So, Dr. Siddiqa.
Thank you, Manoj. Just a bit of correction. I'm currently a senior fellow at the Department of War Studies, King's College London. And also, may I recommend an earlier book, my first book, which was on Pakistan's arms procurement and defense production. So I haven't only worked on military business, but I've worked on military procurements as well. It's interesting to listen to. I mean, I'm glad, to hear the perspective from India on Pakistan-China relations. Let me lay it out that essentially Pakistan-China relations, I mean, they're historic, yet it's a very complex relationship. Just because there is a problem between Pakistan and India and Pakistan and China does not necessarily provide the cushion or fasten, tie the two countries together into a knot. It is a far more complex relationship. I mean, if you look at Pakistan, if it has to deal with India, which is a big country, big neighbor with which it has adversarial relations, it also has a complexity of dealing with a friend, which is far, 10, 20 times bigger its size, China, and would like to expand its strategic relationship. The way I look at it, there are two relationships right now between Pakistan and China. One is the military strategic relationship, which has been stable and growing slowly and gradually. It has its complexities too, and I'll come to that. And the other, which they tried to begin into around 2015-16, was the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has slowed down, really noticeably. And there are several reasons for that. Pakistan's own kind of pushback. And I would say that the pushback, the face of that pushback was the previous Imran Khan government, but it was actually the military which wanted to push China back and not allow it to creep into Pakistan's economy the way it had planned to do. Then it came to a point where China, of course, had lost money. It had its own financial crises, economic crises, and because of a kind of marginal resistance from Pakistan, even Chinese investors are not keen to kind of completely jump into Pakistan's economy. And what they've also noticed is that the size of Pakistan's economy is not that huge to, kind of do the kind of investment that they had initially hoped to do in 2015-16. I mean, at that time, it was about $60 to $61 billion. Eventually, it was around 26, 27 that got invested in Pakistan. So that is frozen because that also became a very noticeable relationship. There was IMF asking Pakistan to put on the brakes, and brakes have been put. The other thing which is important to note is that while strategically or military strategically, it's a stable relationship, Pakistan has not been benefiting from the new kind of a Cold War as in some respects, India has. Previous Cold War, there was between Soviet Union and United States. Pakistan was definitely a beneficiary. In this kind of a Cold War, a different kind of a Cold War that is starting the US-China competition. Pakistan is not necessarily a beneficiary because it wants to maintain a balance. Its other needs, its economic needs, it's dealing with FATF, with IMF, international financial institutions. Its economic needs have kind of tied it down to the middle. So if it wanted to explore, I believe that there was a period between 2013 to 2017 or 2018, about 3 to 4 years, where there was a lot of excitement in the in the larger strategic community about actually shifting away from the United States to China. That eventually did not happen because there's a very strong American lobby inside Pakistan, and B, it was also realized that Pakistan would benefit much more standing in the balance. In fact, let me also remind you that in 2019, when General Bajwa came to the UK, I think it was the second time, he gave a speech at the IISS, limited audience. But one of the things, and I'll quote him verbatim, he said, Pakistan has genetic ties with the West. Help us out, and we will kind of stay connected instead of going towards China. Now, it's important to understand, I think, even especially for the Indian audience, that Pakistan, one, stays in the middle, and that strategic middle limits it, does limit its relations with China. I'll give you two examples that while, my friends here in ORF would like to talk about this, some sinistrous relationship building up between China and Pakistan, the fact of the matter is that recently Karachi Port Trust, while two of the berths were being kind of leased out to, and there's discussion with I believe with Qatar, China showed interest, but Pakistan did not kind of entertain that, and they said, "Oh, we're sorry, but we've already given it to Qatar." And so there is that mixing, the high and low mix, which is a term one uses for arms technology procurement. This is what Pakistan is trying to do strategically. While partnering with China, it's also not wanting to exclude itself, and it wants to bring others on board. Manoj talked about Giovanni, about Gwadar. Gwadar, of course, development is done by the Chinese. There is Chinese presence there. But what has happened, the new development which has happened, is that Pakistan, 2013 onwards, Chinese were very reluctant and very unhappy with the idea of anyone else coming into Gwadar for investment. Now there is Saudi investment being looked at, Saudi and UAE, oil refinery. In fact, in the past couple of in the past one year, a year and a half, the British High Commissioner, the American ambassador have, gone and toured Gwadar. This is something which was completely unheard of, at least 3 years ago. Now, while Pakistan is engaged with China strategically, one, it is an engagement which may be its last option, because with a big country like India sitting next door, and unless these relations get resolved, Pakistan has to build up. And therefore, that's one. The other is that as Indo-Pacific strategy moves on, and it's being charted out, somewhere, in the West, Pakistan doesn't want to be excluded strategically, and it has an interest in Western Pacific. So that is where it wants to have its footprint and its interest. So Middle East, West Asia, West Asia. So West Asia is where it would want to have its footprints, where it would want, to be noticed. Now, as far as very quickly, my last point on Pakistan-China relations. Now, Pakistan, again, that is one of the last options. In fact, the last options that Pakistan has. Its defense industry has grown primarily because of cooperation with China. In fact, this is a model unlike India, which goes to the drawing board. That's how, for example, Tejas were produced. Pakistan has taken a middle of the road option, which is it has helped China, in fact, develop its designs. The JF-17 Thunder is in itself, let me point out very quickly, is a project which goes back to the F-7, the MiG-21s. So initially the project was to, produce a cost-effective fighter jet with the platform, the design being the F-7, and, to put Western avionics. That was essentially the idea. But then when Western avionics were not available, then it was, with the two together, it was co-developed. The design was co-developed to cater to Pakistan's use and for the export market. Pakistan sees China as the only possibility to get technology now. It doesn't have the money. I don't see in the foreseeable future that Pakistan will be able to get technology from elsewhere. Pakistan's army chief has arrived in the US. There might be some opening up. The opening up might allow Pakistan to purchase some technologies, but the bottom line here is purchase. From China, Pakistan can acquire things at a much more affordable price. The 8 submarines. I mean, it's so interesting that again, lack of options. I mean, the submarines, the hull was essentially cut to accommodate a German engine, which was then refused, and so Pakistan and China have gone back to using a Chinese engine instead of a German engine. So this is something which lack of a better option is there. One final point before I finish is that in Galwan, for instance, I think there were some hawks within the Pakistani larger strategic community, in fact, which had suggested that it could be a joint operation. But then neither did China want to take Pakistan on board, because China on its own can create a two-front situation for India. It doesn't need Pakistan to do that. And the other thing is, as far as Pakistan's acquisitions, naval acquisitions and exercises are concerned, and it's important to notice that, anti-piracy, there are a lot of exercises that Pakistan and China do together. It's critical to note that there is no basing facility, and I don't think that Pakistan in the foreseeable future plans to give a basing facility to China. It doesn't want to raise the heckles. In many ways, it's for the West, and it would completely compromise its middle of the road strategy. That's one. The other is that this expansion or this building up the Navy, I would say there is a gap here as well, because as the Navy wants to grow, Navy as a service, Pakistan Navy wants to have a footprint in the larger strategy. But at the end of the day, there is a problem here. There is a gap here that in the larger military strategy, it still has little space. And so, what the Navy does, I mean, from what I've heard from sources in the Navy, is that when AUKUS started, I mean, there was, of course, talk about, what did AUKUS mean? There were worries. And yet the response from the naval chief himself, this is 3 years ago, was that, look, AUKUS does not threaten Pakistan. So the relationship, and I think that there is the problem here in Pakistan is a bit of an imbalance. That on the one hand, the naval operators, the Navy is now primarily dealing with the Chinese. It goes, it trains there. There's far more cooperation, but there is a gap. There isn't a matching strategy which is being developed. So there are some of the thoughts, and we'll kind of have more discussion in Q&A. I'll stop here.
Much, Aisha. You've given us a fascinating overview of the whole policy, and what we can see is that from the three presentations that there is a often in India there is a kind of a caricature view of the China-Pakistan relationship. So obviously what we've heard here is that we have gone beyond that caricature view and we're looking at the substance, and it basically means states have sophisticated strategies, and they put in place sophisticated strategies. For example, this whole business of two-front war, I would say if you go back to the China-Pakistan relationship, you find that in the 65 war, to some extent, it made an impact because India was very weak. The Chinese kind of indirect intervention. In the 71, it made no difference whatsoever. And now it's up in the air, meaning neither party, neither Pakistan nor China, are likely to intervene in someone else's troubles with the third party, which is India. So I think it's unlikely, but there are some issues that I'd like to flag, and that is, as I started off by talking about nuclear technology, because as I said, in nuclear technology, China did an extremely breathtaking thing, that in the sense that it crossed a major threshold. So beginning with that, then I would like to ask, now there are other thresholds. For example, the Chinese are leaders in hypersonics. They are leaders in electronic warfare. They are leaders in undersea drones. Now, specifically, Abhijit, in the sense, if these technologies are transferred to Pakistan at some point, what kind of impact can they have? That's one, this thing. And the second point is that can Pakistan think of adopting an A2AD strategy towards India, the kind of same strategy that China has adopted towards the United States in the Western Pacific? Can that be a viable strategy? But I'm just throwing up some things. But what we'll do is we'll open up this discussion now to the floor. Don't respond right now. You can respond later. We'll open up this discussion to the floor. And I'm just wondering if I can request former High Commissioner to Islamabad, Sharat Sabarwal, to make some observations here.
Agree with what you said, which is that we need to be cautious, but we don't have to overreact. But we need to be very cautious. As you said, we went beyond a caricature which is presented at times, an exaggerated version of the cooperation, and we have tried to go down to the substance. But permit me to say that substance, whatever substance is there, is very substantive. I think that has to be very clear. Over 70% of Pakistan's arms are coming from China now, more than 70%. Nuclear cooperation continues, at least civil nuclear cooperation. The 7th plant they are setting up in Chashma. Also, briefly, to comment on this balancing act between the two, which Dr. Siddiqa spoke of. I think it's a very difficult task for Pakistan. It's becoming more and more difficult. There was a time, for a long time, it benefited from both countries. But it's coming to a situation where it has to make choices, and very hard choices. The fact is that armaments are coming mainly from China, but Pakistan needs the West economically. If they continue to live beyond their means, they need IMF every now and then, and so on and so forth. So it's becoming a more and more difficult situation. There are some contradictions in this relationship, but it remains a substantive relationship. We need to be cautious.
No, I also agree with Vijit and Sharad that China-Pakistan defense cooperation, we don't need to be paranoid about it. But at the same time, one has to bear in mind the history and likely trajectory of this relationship. I'm not persuaded that Pakistan is trying to occupy a strategic middle between West and China. Nature of relations between China and Pakistan, strategic engagement is very different from what Pakistan can hope to have with the West at this point of time. So it doesn't have that choice, and I don't think it's trying to achieve that either. I think we should bear that in mind. Likewise, Abhijit, past conduct in certain conflict situations, absolutely no indicator of what will happen. You referred to Galwan. Chinese objectives in Galwan were very limited. They had absolutely no interest in Pakistan getting involved. In case of Balakot, Pakistan in fact denied that anything significant happened. So where is the question of China getting involved? So we have to bear in mind the fact that while the possibility of a full-fledged naval base being acquired by China, whether at Gwadar or Jiwani or Karachi, may not be in near term. If you look at the pattern of Chinese expansion of its naval footprint in Indian Ocean, it has moved incrementally. Starting with anti-piracy operations in 2008, first entry of PLN Navy submarines about a decade ago, and to a situation where there is a near continuous presence of Chinese submarines in Indian Ocean. At any given point of time, quoting our naval chief, there are 6 to 8 Chinese naval assets. So we can work on the assumption that Chinese will use facilities in Pakistan, because this is one huge handicap or disadvantage China has vis-a-vis USA. Absence of a network of bases. It doesn't have to be, in military situation alone. For instance, Gwadar, the airport is nearing completion. In a military situation, it will be able to take Chinese, strategic aircraft. Or, you have Type 039 submarines. Second set of 4 will be manufactured in Karachi. This will give them a certain capability, which will be very useful for repair work in Karachi. I can give you any number of logistics is already happening. In fact, it's happening in Hambantota also. So this is a process. This is not something which happens overnight, and we are moving in that direction. In any future military conflict with Pakistan, we'll have to work on the assumption that there will be presence of Chinese naval assets at Pakistani ports. That creates an entirely different situation, which we'll have to bear in mind. Likewise, when it comes to, Manoj referred to, nuclear dimension, this is one area I would like to hear from our colleagues here. There are reports about China's involvement in development of CLEC or Pakistan's nuclear triad. Babar 3, we don't know what's the progress on that. But going by, past history of extensive collaboration between China and Pakistan in nuclear and missile field, this is definitely in realm of possibility. So we'll have to watch out that this is something will happen. And also what Manoj suggested, transfer technology in areas like supersonics and drones, or what Sharad referred to. Just in June this year, another agreement was signed on Chashma 5, grandfathering China's commitment NSG, which it joined in 2008, 15 years later. So, we can't be unmindful of these facts. So we'll have to bear in mind that China-Pakistan strategic linkages and defense cooperation will continue to expand and acquire new characteristics, including a possibility of China, getting a sort of, basing or logistic support base in Pakistan. And, we can't rule out. A two-front scenario is always there. I mean, this is something, any defense plan, India will have to work on that basis.
Hello, I'm Samidha Jain. I'm doing my bachelor's from Delhi University. So I have two questions, one directed towards Commander Abhijit Singh and another one to Ambassador Pal. My first question is that Commander sir spoke about the deterrence, the diplomacy deterrence in the maritime, how maritime diplomacy is becoming a deterrence. So India and Pakistan have a history of collaborating on exercises with the army and the air force, but they have rarely ever collaborated. India and Pakistan have never collaborated in naval exercises. Though it's a huge sign of deterrence and it can be a possible sign of deterrence, why is it that Pakistan only collaborates with China when it comes to maritime exercises? My second question, we were just talking about how China is very apprehensive in developing a port in Pakistan, but Pakistan doesn't want it. Apart from the economic piggybacking which it's doing on the West, what are some other reasons why Pakistan is apprehensive or adamant of not having a Chinese port in its land? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deepa Kumar Sharma, a student at University of Delhi. My question is directed towards Abhijit sir. So, in the strategic realm, there's a thinking that the Strait of Malacca, which is very crucial to China, can be choked by India in the events of a war. And the CPEC project is being developed as an alternative to the Strait of Malacca, where the supplies can be landed in China if war does break out. So is there a possibility that this can be realized, that CPEC can be developed as a alternative to Strait of Malacca? And so one more thing, you talked about the threshold technology such as the nuclear power. So India is currently developing its own fifth generation stealth fighter jet. And the China is a leader in stealth technology. So if Pakistan asks, so can China provide stealth technology to the Pakistan Air Force?
My question is actually for Dr. Siddiqa. Dr. Siddiqa, I just wanted a clarification. I'm not sure I heard you correctly. Did you say that it was a Pakistan military that had reservations about the CPEC? And if yes, what kind of reservations? Because I think I might have got you wrong there. So could you just clarify that, please? My name is Elizabeth. I am now an academic. I used to be a journalist earlier.
But she's a former journalist.
Yeah. Thank you.
Elizabeth, my response to your question, let me start with that, is that yes, that's what I said. Military's reservation. And I said that Imran Khan was the face of slowing down completely. First 2 years of Imran Khan government, CPEC came to practically a standstill, with Imran Khan even accusing Chinese of corruption. But the fact of the matter is that there was an underlying policy. There is no document, etc., for that. But General Bajwa, I believe, was very keen on getting back in bed with the American. And another thing which is very interesting is that Titian Copper Company, which had stake in Ricodec. This is the copper mine in Balochistan, in which the Chinese were very interested. After Sendek, the other big project that the Chinese were interested in Balochistan was Ricodec. And technically, Titian was, was pushed out through the Supreme Court decision, which challenged the initial contract between Titian Copper Company and the government of Balochistan and Pakistan. But the way the things kind of then turned out, and I've been kind of privy to, some of the developments that were happening. Titian Company was brought back by the GHQ, negotiation directly by the GHQ, which means that Chinese, the possibility of China coming into Balochistan was blocked. So my argument here is that while it's very easy, and I'm not saying that we are two enemy states, Pakistan and India, and of course one can understand, when people say that no, we should look very seriously at Pakistan-China relationship and how they develop, and they would probably smirk at Abhijit Singh saying that India should take note of these developments, but not, kind of become too hyper about it. The fact of the matter is that it is a far more complex relationship between Pakistan and China than what meets the eye. Of course, weapons will come. If India is developing a strategic relationship with the United States and bringing in technology, why would Pakistan not be expected to find its own partnerships? There is no weaponry coming from the West anywhere. It has, and let's also understand that let's not get tempted by looking at Pakistan's defensive posture only in terms of India. There is that. But there is also Pakistan trying to develop, a strategic role or a position for itself. It is, after all, a nuclear weapon state. So I'm not saying that it has as huge ambitions as India, but it wants to be noticed and it wants, to have a position. Yes, economic worries are there, economic problems are there, and they are going to continue to be there, which is what makes the West relevant for Pakistan. And which is one of the reasons that CPEC did not take off the way it should have taken off. I think it's also important to realize that we cannot also ignore the lobbies that work in every single country. Like in India, there is the Russian lobby, weapons lobby, and then there is a developing American lobby. In Pakistan's case, America, with which it has had a long engagement. Now, it's very interesting that the strategic training of the Pakistani command and staff still continues to take place in Western training institutions, which is critical. So that engagement is there, and I would argue that engagement actually does pull back Pakistan from going whole hog into an engagement with China. Also, what stops the military from kind of opening up far too much from China is because it does not want to become. I mean, throughout CPEC investment as well, I think one clarity which Pakistan had in strategic circles was that it did not want to become a Sri Lanka for China. And China also did not treat Pakistan like Sri Lanka. I mean, there is debt burden, of course, yet there is an effort to limit that on one hand, and the treatment from China has also been has been different. So in Gwadar and Jiwani, for instance, I think it's important to note that some critical parts of the port territory has been denied to China. It's not been given there. I mean, Pakistan military controls there. Chinese engineers have come under serious attack. There have been terrorist attacks inside Pakistan. And China has insisted since long to let it allow that Pakistan should allow it to station its own military to guard its business interests, which Pakistan has systematically denied. It raised a force of 12,000. So it's China-Pakistan Economic Corridor North and South Security Force, manned by Pakistanis. And in fact, up until 2 years ago, it was paid for by the Chinese. But after the last terrorist attack, China is no longer paying for that. So there are problems with the relationship. It's not everything is very smooth. There are complexities, and that complexities is not because Pakistan and China are not willing partners. They are willing partners, but that willing partner does not want to allow its bigger partner to kind of come and take a larger space, which would limit or which would constrain Pakistan's independence, so to say. So I would say that the so-called balancing, on the one hand, is because of the economic issues, but also because Pakistan wants to have that space for itself.
Yeah, I'll certainly respond when you're talking about the point that this gentleman also mentioned about CPEC. Yes, of course, it's run into trouble right now, but in some other guise, it could be revived in some other way down the line. And of course, it certainly helps the certainly helps the Chinese to at least limit the effects of the Malacca dilemma. And they do need to have some avenue of making it into the Gulf of Hormuz. They need to make it into the Persian Gulf. They need a base, or at least they need certain set of facilities that allow their naval shipments to be well protected, their naval assets and the commercial shipping also to be protected. So I think Pakistan, because of its geographic location, so that's what I said right at the outset during my comments, that it's a reciprocal relationship. Pakistan's geographic location itself gives it certain amount of leverage. So it is not something that is, purely asymmetrical. There is a certain amount of symmetry in the relationship. But as far as technologies, that will be my second point, is that if you look at the way the Pakistanis have benefited from the Chinese, you've got the Pakistanis who've been plugged into the Baidu compass system, their global positioning. That is the Chinese equivalent of the US global positioning satellite system. And of course, many of its processing centers are subsidized for, as far as satellite processing centers and others are concerned, been subsidized by the PRC. And the Baidu will also help provide the Pakistanis and at least its Fatah 1 capabilities, multiple launch rocket system with guidance, precision guidance. And also the role that HUA has played in terms of penetrating the Pakistani civilian and military cloud, Also, you will see a lot of telemetry support that the Chinese will get out of Pakistan for their own military operations. And of course, you also have other things. For instance, like the DF-17 that Dr. Joshi pointed out. I'm not saying that the Chinese will transfer it, but it's something that you should look out for, and that is certainly going to have an effect on India as well. But I do agree with Dr. Siddiqa about many of the points she made as well. When it comes to production, maintenance, overhaul, Pakistan has been very, very crucial. And Kamra and the Pakistan and Pak have been played a very critical role. Pakistan Aeronautical Complex also has been very critical in overhauling aircraft, and they've helped the Chinese also there. So there's a lot of tech cooperation, and the Pakistanis are able to bring something to the table as well. So I think that is important. My point is that perhaps what the Pakistanis are looking for, we spoke a lot about, Dr. Siddiqa spoke about it, and also Ambassador Sabarwal mentioned the balance that the Pakistanis are trying to achieve between the West and China. It's entirely possible the Pakistanis will try and leverage as much of their military capabilities from the Chinese, but keep that economic pipeline and the flow of money coming in from the West. It sort of parallels what India did through the Cold War itself. I mean, we were the largest recipient of aid for a period of time during the Cold War, most of the Cold War. And the United States was the major giver of that, provider of that aid. But we leveraged most of our capabilities from the Soviets. Now, it ties back also into the point that Dr. Siddiqa made about, Pakistani officers being trained in Western academies. It was true even for us. Our doctrine was influenced by the British. Many of our officers were trained in US military academies. And that continued for pretty much, even after the Cold War, but also through the Cold War. So there was a lot of contact among officers also, military officers from India's end. But we leveraged Soviet technology, so that's how it works. So that's how maybe Pakistan could craft something along those lines. Whether it would have that finesse, whether it would have the kind of dexterity to, juggle all that is a different matter. But, it's also a question of, Pakistan tends to live beyond its means. So it's perennially in crisis, economic crisis. India did not face that much of a challenge. But yes, that's a possibility that it could try and replicate what India somewhat did.
Thanks.
That is a good analogy. But anyway, that's one way of framing it.
No, that is an interesting analogy, Karthik. I'm glad you pointed it out. Abhijit?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I'm going to begin by just complimenting Dr. Siddiqa, Ambassador Kantha, and Ambassador Sabrawal for pointing out some very relevant facts. And I, to a great degree, agree with all of what has been said. In response to the questions that have been posed, there's a number of them. Let me just start by telling you something that was told to me a few years ago, which was that every version of black has shades of gray, meaning nothing is black. When you go and look at it closely, you find there's always a nuance, there's always a shade. And I think that's the point that Dr. Siddiqa was mentioning. I had a similar conversation with a Pakistani Commodore a couple of years ago, many years ago actually. We were in Australia attending a conference. And here's the thing I want to tell you about the India-Pakistan relationship. There is an antipathy between India and Pakistan, and there's antipathy between India and China. But India and Pakistan, in terms of interactions and conversations, are far more frank about what they feel about each other than is the case with the Chinese, with whom you're almost never able to talk to, because also it's a communist country. They don't open up, they don't say too many things. But I remember having this chat with the Commodore many years ago, and he pointed out that, you see, the trouble with India is that it has, what Dr. Joshi said, the carry-catcher vision. He didn't use that term. He said, you have a very monochromatic way of looking at Pakistan. You don't understand. This is a problem when, in a dyad, when you have a weaker side and a stronger side, the stronger side cannot understand the peculiar anxiety of the weaker side. And back then, China and Pakistan were beginning to get close. They were fairly close. But even he pointed out to me at that time that there are nuances in this relationship. And if you look at it closely, there are many things that in this relationship that we are not entirely satisfied with. And similarly, the Chinese may not be satisfied with the Pakistanis. But there's one thing that I pointed out to him, which is to say that you're actually not correct in saying that we don't understand Pakistani anxiety. To a degree, we do. I want to tell you that back in 2008, when India came up with the IONS framework, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, Pakistan was not a member. But the Indian Navy insisted that Pakistan be made a member of the IONS. Because Pakistan, at that time, the reasoning was this was a strong power. I mean, India and Pakistan are the only two so to say, proper navies in the region. If you count Iran, Iran is another. But in South Asia, there's just India and Pakistan. So the Indian reasoning was, and Admiral Chauhan, who's now the director of the NMF, was at that time very much he was the one that was sort of putting the whole effort together. The point was made that the Pakistanis have to be part of it because otherwise you cannot have an honest initiative. And Pakistan was made part of it. And in 2015, you will find this very strange that in 2015, Pakistan was chairing the working group on communication and interoperability. And in that group was India, along with Australia and one or others. And if you look at the fact that the Indian Coast Guard and the Pakistani Coast Guard do talk to each other on a regular basis, the PMSA, it's called the Pakistan Maritime Security Agency, the Coast Guard, do talk to each other. So the animosity between at least in the maritime domain is qualitatively different from what it is with China. But the problem is that the Navy is not in equal service in Pakistan. The Army calls the shots. So regardless of what understanding you have with the Navy might reach out to you and say that let's do things together. Why don't you come and participate in Aman exercises, etc.? It has no meaning. Because as long as the Pakistan Army dominates the discourse, they are the ones who draw the lines for all of the service. What's it that you can do and what you can't do. And after Balakot, of course, this has been a very fraught relationship and, hair trigger. The second point I wish to make is this, that, there is always a conservative view of, so to say, the adversary. And there's also a constructivist view of, things are changing, all of that. The conservative view is, and I would completely agree, is that that what's happening between China and Pakistan is worrisome. All of these technologies that have come up, hypersonics, drones, missile stealth technology, China could at any time transfer to Pakistan. But my reasoning is this: if China had to transfer all of that, if China had to establish a base in Pakistan, it would have done it by now. What's taken China so long to do it? Because there's a number of analysts have made the point that at this time, Pakistan is so beholden to China for all the technology it gives it, for all the resources it gives it, that any time China asks for a favor, Pakistan must oblige. But the Chinese have not asked for that favor. And why have they not asked it? And for that, I'm going to refer you to someone that is considered the father of China's maritime strategy, that is Admiral Lu Huaking. Back in the 1980s, Admiral Lu Huaking actually was fighting Maoist thinking, which said that we shouldn't go beyond China's interests on land. The Navy was simply a support service to the army. You simply needed to stop the enemy from attacking the mainland. Admiral Lu Huaking said that we should look at the first island chain. All of these areas are dear to us. They are a core interest. But beyond that, we should be very, very wary of using force. And if you look at the Chinese deployments, over the past 2 decades, actually, there has rarely been an instance where they have used force outside the first island chain. All they've done is posture near Guam, which is the second island chain. But they have rarely used force beyond that. My reading is, I could be wrong on this because I also have limited knowledge. But the issue is that if the Chinese are going to come into the Indian Ocean and they're going to posture to India, what are they going to gain out of it? They have a different strategy for the Indian Ocean. That is incremental stakeholdership, which is why the Indian Ocean dialogue that was held recently in Kunming wasn't done by the Chinese Navy. It was done by some development agency, China Development Agency. And a number of countries in the Indian Ocean, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, they were all in attendance. Even Nepal was in attendance. That's what the Chinese want to do. They don't want to fight with you. They want to come into your region as a development provider. They want to come in here as a security provider. They want to make, if at all, they want to target India, they want to make India irrelevant. And to a degree, they are succeeding in doing. So this fight is not going to be fought at sea or in the battlefield. And to that degree, I think the Pakistani maritime thinkers, strategists have got it right. This is about competitive diplomacy. Be it in the field of maritime, be it in the field of military or infrastructure, connectivity, you've got to have your friends. You've got to roll out the influence. And they have only one friend whom they can bank on. That's China for the moment. And I would agree with Dr. Siddiqa that there are too many issues in the China-Pakistan relationship. We'll have to see how it folds in the future. I'm saying there's need for us to be cautious. Last point on stealth technology. Look at it like this. The Chinese are known not to transfer the best version of their platforms to another country. So the Type 39s that are the Yuan class, this is the S-26 version, export version. The export version is not the same as the Yuan class. And if the Chinese had to transfer SSNs to the Pakistanis, they would have done that by now. The nuclear attack submarines. In fact, if the Chinese transfer nuclear attack submarines or nuclear attack technology to the Pakistanis, if they were to give them, say, the nuclear version of the missile or miniaturize the warhead on the Babur 3, they haven't done that. One of the things about the Babur 3 is you don't hear very much about it is because apparently the Pakistanis are having a problem with miniaturizing the warhead on the Babur 3. Again, I could be wrong on this, but this is just a grapevine. And the Chinese have not helped them with it. If the Chinese had to help them, they would have done so by now. My sense is they don't want to alienate India at a time when geopolitics is not about military contestation. It's about so much else to it. There's so many dimensions to it. And that's how I think the Chinese are thinking. And I think we've got to keep that in mind. Thanks.
Can I just add one point? Abhijit, thank you so much, for making all these points and completely agree with you. In fact, it's very important that let me take you back to Kargil. I mean, in Kargil, let's not forget that when the first trip that was made by the Pakistani delegation was to China. There was Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, Army Chief Pervez Musharraf, the Air Chief, Naval Chief, all went asking for, Pakistan's memory of China is of 1965 when it went and it got what it wanted. And I remember talking to Air Chief Marshal P.Q. Mehdi, who talked to me about that trip. And he said that, he said I sat with the PLA, Chief of PLA Air Force and asked him that, these are different things we want, these aircraft, those technologies. And the PLA Air Force chiefs looked at him and said, of course, I'll give you everything, but let's wait for the leaders to decide. And the message that Pakistan brought back from China, and that's why then the delegation went to United States to negotiate a withdrawal, was because China said no. And China has been encouraging Pakistan to have trade with India, to have a relationship. Now, it does not automatically mean that it wants, to have the best of friendship. But I think it wants to maintain a strategic balance, have talks with India, have trade with India, but also engage it in a competition. That's how competitive relationships, get built. Thanks.
Minutes left. I don't know if you have a question. I'll entertain it because you didn't this thing when I was asked.
Good evening. I'm Colonel Bajender. I work with US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. My question is primarily to Dr. Aisha, and thank you, Dr. Aisha, Commander Abhijit, yourself and Karthik for a good insight. Pakistan has been, having good relationship with US in 80s and 90s when US was operating in Afghanistan and logistic bases were in Pakistan. And somehow this relationship could not pick up the way it had to. And I primarily feel that it was because of the political leadership in Pakistan, and the relationship between China and India is more of a necessity between both of them. So I just wanted to know from you what is the role of Politburo, Chinese Politburo, and the central CCP leadership in lobbying in China, and the impact on their political circles, because Pakistan has been having a long, turbid political scenario right from 90s, and that is one reason that Pakistan is not as developed or as come up as India is now. Thank you.
That's to do with China, because otherwise I could always ask Ashok Kant to give us a response. Yeah, please, please. Yeah.
See, I think what's important to understand is that for colonels have to understand is that Pakistan and United States have a very long relationship. I mean, it's a very long American investment. And very clearly, America, it's not just that Pakistan wants to stick to America. America also wants to stick around, wants Pakistan to stick around. It doesn't want Pakistan to entirely jump into the American, the Chinese bandwagon. I think it's also essential to understand that United States, Pakistan have a long, I think they have a lead in terms of having a strategic understanding. And American kind of influence in Pakistan, in its media, in its society, is also far more blown and grown as compared to China. China is struggling to kind of build its influence in Pakistan. The Chinese Communist Party, politically, it doesn't have that kind of, there isn't that, solid left in Pakistan with which it would have a relationship. But it has relations with Pakistan's politicians, with political parties. And I think the best relationship that is there, is between, from government to government. It's also trying to expand its influence within the Pakistani society, but still has a lot of work to do. There isn't a comparison right there. I mean, the families, I remember hearing it here in the UK. I mean, when you talk to Western diplomats, for example, that, look, Pakistan, all the three services, Pakistan's of the armed forces are, theoretically, they're all Chinese now. So the answer that I always get is that, look, West continues to have the soft power over Pakistan. The influence, from politicians to political parties to military personnel, their families, all of them are still very heavily invested in the West. And I think that is not something which is about to shift, primarily because of, issues in China. I mean, if China, for example, tomorrow changes its migration policy, you have Pakistanis there, but not that kind of influence that, that the West has. I hope that answers your question.
I think that brings us to an end this dialogue, which you will all agree was very fruitful, and I learned a lot from this. So I'd like to thank my three speakers, particularly Dr. Siddiqa, who's speaking all the way from London and has given us invaluable perspective on this. Commodore Abhijit Singh and Karthik Bomkanti. So let's give them a hand, and then we have tea next door.